Hi, everybody. My name is Elizabeth. I am a librarian at Ann Arbor District Library, and I'm excited to be here today to share with you some book recommendations in celebration of Native American Heritage Month. Today, I am going to be sharing some nonfiction recommendations with you, and I wanted to start by acknowledging that we all live on Indigenous land. There are several different tribes whose native land is the state of Michigan. And it is a great segue for me to talk about my first recommendation, which is Menumen, The Story of Wild Rice in Michigan by Barbara J. Barton. And this book talks about the history of wild rice in Michigan, which was traditionally cultivated by the Anishinaabe people, which are one of the tribes that call Michigan home. And this is an amazing book for learning more about the people and traditions that historically and still live in Michigan. And so I think it's really important for us to acknowledge the Indigenous tribes that call Michigan home. And one of the ways to do that is to learn more about traditions that take place here in our state still. And so this is actually I think this is one of the only books I've ever read that focuses so intensely on a specific a traditionally indigenous crop, and that is wild rice. Wild rice was cultivated throughout the Great Lakes region in wetlands for hundreds and hundreds of years. And as the wetlands started to disappear due to settlers and colonizers, so did the tradition of wild rice farming. But it is not gone. It's still particularly prevalent in Minnesota, but there is still wild rice cultivation in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And you can learn all about traditional wild rice farming and cultivation in this book and what wild rice means to the Anishinaabe people and how it's traditionally used and just kind of the efforts also of the tribal people to continue the tradition of cultivating and farming wild rice, which is really important to them. This is a wonderful read. It's not very long. It's under 200 pages, a wonderful introduction to wild rice and to what that means. There's some great photos too, so you can see the difference between river rice and lake rice, several different types, just tons to learn. You can learn about what it looks like at different stages, just all things that were really pretty new to me, learning about how wild rice is cultivated and of the traditional way that it's harvested and all that kind of stuff. Just amazing. And it was just it's a really special read. I would recommend it, especially to a Great Lakes native, because this is truly something that happens, here on where we live. So really cool. Menumen, The Story of Wild Rice in Michigan, is my first recommendation. And that gives me a great segue to my next recommendation, which is The Sous Chef's Indigenous Kitchen by Sean Sherman with Beth Dooley. And if you have read Menumen and are interested in potentially attempting to cook with some wild rice, this may be the cookbook for you. This is a wonderful, wonderful cookbook that uses a variety of traditional Native American recipes, and some of which include wild rice. Here's one: duck and wild rice pemmican. And not only are the recipes in here delicious, at least the few that I've tried. This is one of the ones I made, wild rice pilaf. But it's an excellent way to learn more about some of the foods that different Indigenous tribes would eat. And Sean Sherman is Oglala Lakota, so a lot of the recipes revolve around kind of his experiences in his tribe, therefore a lot of them are a lot of them are Midwestern, but there's also many others in here too, and just really good information, native herbs and seasonings. I'm struggling to describe it because I'm reading through it, but just wonderful different ways to celebrate Indigenous eating and Indigenous food, which I think personally is really important and is something that we should all work towards, to be eating really deeply local food and to be exploring ways to sustainably eat food that would typically come from where we are from. So amaranth crackers, I'm just holding up a bunch of different things here. Some of the recipes do call for things that might be challenging to find, but I think that can be kind of fun. Maybe you can challenge yourself to find bison or whatever, but there's also plenty that are perfectly accessible to those of us who, just have access to some grocery stores. So this is the Sous Chef's Indigenous Kitchen. Even if you're not interested in cooking from it, I would recommend giving it a look through. There's so much to learn from here. The next book I actually don't have a physical copy of because there were too many holds on it at AADL, which is awesome. But I have a photo that we can put in here, and that is The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, Native America from 1890 to the present. And that's by David Truer, who's Ojibwe. And he wrote this book partly in response to a different book you might have heard of, which is Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee by Dee Brown, which was written in the 1970s. And that kind of perpetuated in some ways the idea that Native American history has ended, that Native Americans are part of history and not part of the present day, which is definitely not true. And I think that The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee is an absolutely wonderful response and book that indicates how alive and vibrant Native American tribes and traditions and people are today. It was a finalist for the 2019 National Book Award. And it just really helps counter the idea that Native Americans have disappeared and that we learn about them as a part of history and as a part of the past, and that's it. But of course, we know Indigenous people did not disappear. And David Truer actually argues that because of the intense struggles that so many Indigenous people have endured, it is those that have forced them to preserve language, traditions, families, and they have actually come out of these struggles stronger than ever and more immersed in their cultures than ever. And that it's really allowed Indigenous people, not allowed, they've been forced to develop an incredible resourcefulness and just incredible reinvention repeatedly in order to preserve traditions that are so important. And it talks about kind of different models and new models of survival for different tribes around the country. And it emphasizes the resilience of Indigenous people in the United States. So it's a fascinating book just from a historical perspective, but also from the way that it approaches looking at Native American history, both as history, but also as something that is not gone, that's really still happening today. And it's a wonderfully written book. It's nonfiction, but it's really, really interesting. And I would absolutely recommend it to anyone interested in Indigenous and Native culture, or just actually, I think it's a must read for anyone. So would highly recommend The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee. And then lastly, another book that I don't have a physical copy of due to holds, which is wonderful, but I have read before, is Braiding Sweetgrass, and that is by Robin Wall Kimmerer. The subtitle is, I wrote it down just to make sure I got it all, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. And Kimmerer is both a botanist and a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. And those two different perspectives, in a way, come together in this book in to make an absolutely amazing read. So she is looking at plants and living things through both a scientific lens and the lens that plants and animals are our oldest teachers. And so there's kind of this blend of the mythic, the scientific, the historical, the sacred, all entwined together in Braiding Sweetgrass. And, one of her main points is that there are gifts and lessons from living beings, even for those people who may not be used to listening. And I think in this era of grappling with climate change, Braiding Sweetgrass is a really unique and different perspective that offers a way to fight climate change and grapple with that's different than other books that I've read about that. It's not particularly a climate change book, but it struck me as I was reading it that it could be considered, it could be added to a list of reading about climate change in some way, just due to Kimmerer's perspective. And kind of the central argument in the book is just awakening a wider ecological consciousness in humanity, and the fact that both requires acknowledgement of our reciprocal relationship with the earth and with living beings, and also a celebration of it. And so it's a beautiful, beautiful book. I know many people like to listen to it on audiobook. I have not listened to it on audiobook, but I've heard people recommend the audiobook. I just read it, but it's beautifully written. It's extremely thoughtful. I also know many people who have read it multiple times. And I just think it's a very timely book for the place that we're in the world right now, and a wonderful way to get kind of an Indigenous perspective on humanity's relationship with the earth and with living things in particular. So that's Braiding Sweetgrass. And those are my nonfiction recommendations in celebrating Native American Heritage Month. There are, of course, dozens of other amazing nonfiction titles. So I encourage you to look more up and share your recommendations in the comments if you've read something amazing, either by an Indigenous author or from an Indigenous perspective. And I also have fiction recommendations, so make sure you look for those too, which are coming in a separate event. Thank you for listening.